Mercedes W15 car is a particular one with a lot of secretive solutions from James Allison. He outlines these solutions, but we also have better details from Shakedown pictures and a couple of videos that have came out showing a little bit off of the rear end. These 2024 cars have different solutions, especially for the Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull. They all seem to have gone down a different route. But which one will come out the champion? I mean, James Allison says the Red Bull is beatable, and is that possible for the 2024 season? Let's go over the secretive W15 car a bit more in detail. Wanted to thank you guys real quick before getting into the bigger part of the video. I mean, the support's been insane. I'm genuinely so happy. So thank you so much for the support. We're only getting started. It's testing very, very soon, and there's so much to cover. This is just a little bit up until we get into that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday groove. So thank you so much for the support. Let's get into the W15 video. So this car, obviously, it's a pretty good looking car, but it's got a lot of tweaks to it that I wanted to get into. As I said, James Allison has outlined areas that will be crucial to beating Red Bull in the championship fight. Now, the biggest areas that we know are big crucial changes for this Mercedes car is really in the rear end of the car. The rear end in the Shakedown was particularly not shown because of these areas that they didn't want to show off. But we did see a couple of more new things within this and some details that I think will be crucial for them winning. Now, we know that these side pods that they have in the car are not like any other, this kind of P-shaped side pod. It is kind of similar to the Alpine car when you look at it just hand-on, but they perform very differently. Now, when you look at it from a side view, originally the renders of this car had this side pod almost like a lip, kind of like what we've been seeing with these cars, where it was a little bit sent back, but the actual cooling outlet itself was a little bit further in front. But it's actually quite the opposite. It's kind of an overbite to what we're used to with these cars. It's got a bit of an overbite, and why is that so? So it can push more of its air from the top, if it is going from the top to down in its rear end, which are a little bit slide pods. Not to a big degree, but a little bit of the car is a slide pod. It's nothing extreme to the Aston Martin or the Alpine. It's quite close to the SF24 when comparing the two. The secrets in this car don't just come from the actual real car itself. In the renders, something that's funny that we did not notice for this car is that the actual suspension was completely illegal. Now, teams are going to throw this out there, obviously. It's not a big deal, but it is something funny to focus on. So for the actual suspension itself, when you look at it, off of the eye, you might not catch anything, but the suspension had 7 arms. Now, to keep it short, the actual suspension arms, you can only have up to 6 of them. It actually was something funny that was illegal on a Williams car back in 2019. Now, I mean, if you guys know the Williams 2019, it was a bad car, but they tried having something innovative and they had 7 suspension arms, which the FIA told them they had to take off. They ended up going back to that 6 suspension arm setup and the car was horrible. But the Mercedes car is not going to have this solution. It's just pretty funny that they've thrown that out there. They pulled a Alfa Romeo, or really an RB anything, because the Red Bull cars always have some secretive solutions to them. But otherwise, the actual bottom part of that car, what it's trying to do, and one of my subscribers said, and I kind of like the idea of it, is it's like a slingshot, like a sling pod. It's trying to get what the air that's being distributed from the side of the nose that's going into the side pod, that's not the cleanest of air, but the actual air that is going from the right side that is getting slung into that huge undercut, that's supposed to be clean, efficient air going through that huge undercut in the car, getting to the rear end of the car. And this is their solution of trying to improvise that side pod inlet. Now, we've seen with all the other teams this kind of underbite that's going on in the car, especially to the extreme of the Aston Martin that has it to, I think, a new type of level to where they even had to adjust the suspension that's set up in the Mercedes car to be able to get air into that side pod inlet. It's quite different with this Mercedes car. Is this an advantage or a disadvantage? Well, we won't really know till the car is running out, but it is quite a different solution to what we've seen on the grid. As I said, it brings more clean air along the side pod, getting it to the rear end of the car, where the focal point is. We know it's a pushrod rear suspension. This was something that was talked about a lot, and quite in fact, it was something that gave them a lot of sleepless nights for the chief officers over there and working on the car. They said it was a big problem, whether the push rod will actually be the solution rather to what they had in the pull rod. They've come to see, and even through testing, that the actual car itself has performed better on the rear end stability. Now, this doesn't mean that the car is super efficient and that we know all in all. They did 5 laps. So the actual shakedown testing isn't really accurate. The 5 laps were in the wet. They got a little bit of data from the GoPros that they set up, because the actual GoPros themselves and the cameras that they see, it's really to see where the car is moving in, where it's getting indented. Some of the airflow might be able to see, especially if it's wet. They could get a better idea, but it's not real concrete evidence that this car is going to be brand new and something that's going to just go out there and destroy the competition, because it's only 5 laps. But they have saved the rest of those laps because of the bad running weather, and they wanted to see a little bit more data. They're actually going to run those in Bahrain, whether that be today or tomorrow. The car will be running, and we could see a little bit more from the shakedown, because we got very little footage of this car from there. And I said that was mainly to do with the back of the car. And as I said, we already had the push rod suspension. That's out of the way. But when you look at this rear end of the car, it is a little bit different. You see a little bit more of that slide pod that I was talking about. In this paused video, I was only able to really get a few adjustments here. The biggest thing is that Aston Martin and Mercedes have both been very vocal on the rear end of the car not wanting to get out, and it's important that this part of the car is kept secret. Well, for the Aston Martin, they blurred out the rear end in their shakedown videos. For the Mercedes, you can't see it because of it being a dreary, rainy day. You can't even really zoom in to notice what's going on. The only things that you can kind of see in this picture is a bit of that floor from the rear end and kind of the little hole that they've given into the diffuser to distribute the air that is coming out from the floor going into the diffuser. Just slightly you can see that, but that's been a normal solution on most of the cars, especially in 23 and now even in 24. But the diffuser itself on the very top, that corner edge to the diffuser, has changed just by the slightest. If you look at the W14 towards the end of the year, it did have a little bit of an indent, but it still had that more ovalish shape towards the top, while this is a more squared off shape with a couple of indents in that diffuser. This is something that's obviously going to be a focal point for them, because the car itself really struggled at picking up straight line speed, but they have reduced the actual gearbox to be more of a V shape is what's being talked about. Now, really, this is cutting the gearbox in spots that it doesn't need to be as big to give the car more air streamlined through the diffuser, but also just being able to put in the interior of that car shaped in even more to give it a better aero kit on the outside, but as well as the inside. Aero gains is really the thing that they've been going for, because the car has just been so slow and tragic in the straight line speed. Both in 13 and in 14, they had a barn door of a rear wing that is obviously changed on this new car, and a lot more of the air is concentrated between the side pod and the floor in comparison to what they had before. There's beautiful pictures actually showing off the difference of air distribution and the evolution of this W14 car. This car, as a no side pod design, didn't work. And yes, we do see that Red Bull is doing some type of solution, but I'll tell you right now, while the car might look similar on the engine cover, and I guess you can say that little inlet that we don't know if it's actually a side pod inlet, because right now it's rumored that the actual side pod inlet itself is on the top of the car, but we'll see that on testing, and I'll definitely go over the Red Bull, because so many secretive solutions from them and the W15 in different parts of the car. Red Bull really focused on the side pod because the side pod is a huge change for them, while the W15 focused on the rear end, which was the magic in the RB19. The actual cars themselves, though, as I've said, are not as similar as you think. Because of the overcut side pod, and there actually still being a side pod, the W13 and 14 were completely different cars to that of the RB20. Yes, some imitation is seen, as I said, off of the engine cover and that inlet, but the actual philosophy and aero on the car isn't the same at all, and the solution that Adrian Newey is going for seems to be a better one than what the W14 or 13 was going for. They were losing a lot of those gains that was coming from the front wing into that floor and side pod setup in the 13 and the 14 was just too draggy for the car to handle, and the rear wing itself was losing them a lot of time. They've definitely simplified it when it comes to the looks on the outside, but the car, quite in fact, has a couple of solutions that could really make this a challenger in 2024. James Allison talks about it. Lewis Hamilton obviously talks about it. We've talked about that front wing and as to why that is such an important feature to the car. And there is a video dedicated to it, but I'll go over that little front wing just a little bit more. The actual vortices that it is causing on that car is to promote more outwash on the outside of the car with the way that it is set up. They want more air to go around that tire to give it more tire life. Introducing that with the side pod inlet, they are trying to focus a lot of that air to be going around the tires to give them even more tire life, but pace overall in general. The W15 is a car that I really believe could be a top challenger. It really does seem like we have so many different solutions as to what is the key to beating Red Bull, because that is the marker at the end of the day, but also have they improved all their cars? So excited to go into this testing period in about 2 days time. You know I'm going to be covering it. I'll be there and I'll try to be as quick as possible for it. Not very convenient for time, but we're going to do it. Thank you guys so much for the support on the channel. Please leave a like, subscribe. It'd mean the world, and peace.